The night over, Rivendell was still and soft, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. The stars burned cold and bright above the valley, and the sound of water, always water, murmured through the terraces and gardens like a lullaby older than memory. The houses of healing sat nestled against the eastern slope, their arched windows glowing with the warm light of lamps tended by elven hands. Inside, the air smelled of athelas and cedar, of clean linen and the faint, herbal sweetness of healing tinctures. It was a place of peace, a place where wounds closed and fevers broke, a place where, for a little while, the world's darkness could not reach. But tonight, something was wrong. Corvus felt it first. The raven perched on the stone railing outside the main hall, his head cocked, his black eyes sharp and unblinking. He had been watching the night for hours, as was his habit. Corvus did not sleep the way others did. His rest came in short, shallow intervals, and his mind never fully quieted. He liked it that way. It meant he noticed things, small things, the kind of things that mattered. And right now, he noticed the birds, or rather, the lack of them. The valley was always full of sound at night. The trill of nightingales, the soft hoot of owls, the rustle of wings in the trees. But tonight, the air was empty, silent, as if every living thing with feathers had fled. Corvus shifted on his perch, his talons scraping lightly against the stone. His feathers prickled. He tilted his head, listening, but there was nothing. Just the water, just the lamps, just the quiet hum of elven voices inside the hall. Wrong, he thought. This is wrong. He spread his wings and glided down to the courtyard, landing softly on the flagstones. The air here felt heavier, thicker, as if something invisible pressed down on it. He hopped forward, his eyes scanning the shadows between the pillars and the garden paths. The lanterns flickered in their iron brackets, casting long, wavering shadows across the white stone. And then he saw the guard. The elf stood at his post near the doorway, his spear resting against his shoulder, his posture upright and vigilant. But as Corvus watched, the guard's head began to droop, his shoulders sagged. The spear slipped from his hand and clattered to the stone, and the guard crumpled after it, collapsing in a heap, as if his bones had turned to water. Corvus let out a sharp, harsh croak, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Inside the hall, heads turned, footsteps quickened, and then the door burst open, and Gandalf stepped out, his staff already glowing faintly with white light. His robes billowed behind him as he moved, and his face, lined with age and wisdom and weariness, was hard as stone. "What is it?" the wizard demanded, his voice low and urgent. Corvus hopped toward the fallen guard, his wings half spread. "Sleep," he croaked. "Not natural, smells wrong, tastes wrong." Gandalf knelt beside the guard, his hand hovering over the elf's chest. He closed his eyes, and for a moment his face went still, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. The light from his staff brightened, casting stark shadows across the courtyard. Then his eyes snapped open, and his expression darkened. "A spell," he said quietly, "subtle, woven into the air itself, like a thread in a tapestry. Whoever cast this knew what they were doing. This is not the work of some hedge wizard or desperate cultist. This is precision, training." He rose to his feet and raised his staff higher. The light at its tip blazed suddenly brighter, flooding the courtyard with brilliance that seemed to push back the very night itself. The air shivered, rippling like water, and Corvus felt the oppressive weight lift, as if a blanket had been pulled away. The shadows retreated to the edges of the courtyard, and the lanterns burned steadier. The guard stirred, gasping, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around in confusion, his hand reaching instinctively for his spear. His breathing was ragged, and his face was pale as milk. "Easy," Gandalf said, his voice calm but firm. He placed a hand on the guard's shoulder, steadying him. You were struck by a sleeping spell. You are safe now. But tell me, did you see anyone? Hear anything before you fell? The guard struggled to sit up, his face pale and slick with sweat. I did not see anyone. I was watching the path, as always. And then there was a sound, like wind through leaves, but there was no wind. And then, nothing, just darkness. A trigger word, Gandalf muttered, more to himself than to the guard, or a whispered incantation, close enough to take effect before you could react. He turned and scanned the courtyard, his eyes sharp. Where is Strider? Here, came a voice from the shadows. Aragorn stepped into the light, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His gray cloak was pulled close around him, and his face was tense, alert. His eyes swept the courtyard, reading the scene in an instant. The fallen guard, the scattered shadows, the faint chalk mark on the stone near the doorway. I heard the ravens call, he said. What happened? Someone cast a sleeping spell inside the houses of healing, Gandalf said, his voice tight. They were aiming for the guards, trying to slip past unseen. I broke the spell, but the caster escaped before I could trace them. Strider's jaw tightened. He crouched near the doorway, examining the stone. How many? I do not know, Gandalf admitted, but I found this. He gestured to a spot near the threshold, where a faint symbol had been scratched into the stone. It was small, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A spiral within a circle, with 3 jagged lines radiating outward like cracks in glass. Corvus hopped closer, tilting his head. Cult mark? Perhaps, Gandalf said slowly, studying the symbol with narrowed eyes. But more refined than anything we have seen before. The cult's marks are crude, drawn in haste, meant to invoke fear as much as power. This is different. This is deliberate, elegant even. This is the work of someone trained in the old ways, someone who understands the structure of symbols, not just their surface meaning. Strider stood, his expression grim. Then we're not dealing with fanatics anymore. We're dealing with professionals. Exactly, Gandalf said. He straightened, leaning heavily on his staff for a moment. We need to secure the houses of healing, every entrance, every window, every passage that leads in or out. And we need to find out if anyone else has been affected. If this spell reached farther than we think, there may be others who are compromised. Strider nodded sharply and turned to the guard who was now standing, though still unsteady on his feet. Gather the patrol. I want every healer and patient accounted for. Move quietly. I do not want to start a panic, but I want answers within the hour. The guard saluted, his hand still trembling slightly, and hurried off into the night. His footsteps echoed softly on the stone, fading into the distance. Strider looked back at Gandalf. Do you think they were after someone specific? Or was this just a test? I do not know, Gandalf said, but I intend to find out. He turned to Corvus, who was still examining the symbol on the stone. You saw nothing? No one moving in the shadows? No flicker of movement? No disturbance in the air? Corvus ruffled his feathers indignantly. If I had seen them, they would not have escaped. I saw the spell's effect, felt it in the air like a weight pressing down, but whoever cast it was already gone by the time I sounded the alarm. Fast, silent, professional, like you said. Then they know how to move unseen, Gandalf muttered, which means they have been trained, or they have experience evading watchers. He looked up at the sky where the stars still burned cold and distant. And they chose tonight for a reason. They are testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. This was reconnaissance, not an attack. Which means they'll be back, Strider said flatly. Yes, Gandalf agreed. And next time they will not be so cautious. Next time they will strike with purpose. From the doorway, another figure emerged. Dorothy, her sleeves rolled up, her hands stained with herb paste and the faint smell of athelas clinging to her clothes. She looked tired but steady, her sharp eyes taking in the scene immediately. The fallen guard, now recovering, the symbol on the stone, the tension in Gandalf's posture. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. "I heard shouting, and Corvus sounded like he was calling the end of the world." "A spell," Gandalf said simply. "Someone tried to put the guards to sleep. We stopped it, but the caster is still at large." Dorothy's expression hardened. "Inside Rivendell?" "Inside," Gandalf confirmed. "Which means the danger is not at the gates. It is already here, among us." Dorothy crossed her arms, her jaw set. "Then we need to find them, fast, before they try again." "Agreed," Gandalf said. He turned back to the symbol on the stone, his eyes narrowed in thought. "But we must be careful. Whoever did this is not acting alone. This is part of something larger, a plan, and we are only seeing the first move." Corvus hopped onto Gandalf's shoulder, his claws gripping the wizard's cloak. "Plans are for people who think too much," he said flatly. "Find the bad thing. Stop the bad thing. Simple." Gandalf allowed himself a faint, grim smile. "If only it were that simple, my friend." He looked out across the courtyard toward the lights of Rivendell glowing softly in the terraces beyond. Somewhere out there, in the shadows between the lamps and the waterfalls, an enemy moved unseen. And the worst part was, they had no idea how many more might be waiting. How deep the infiltration ran. How long they had been here, watching, planning, preparing. The night seemed darker now, despite the lamps. Colder, despite the warmth of the valley. Gandalf turned back to the houses of healing, his staff glowing faintly in his hand. "Come, we have work to do." The sun rose slowly over Rivendell, its light spilling like honey across the terraces and gardens. The night's tension had not fully lifted, but with the dawn came a sense of fragile calm, the kind that settles over a place after a storm, when everyone is still listening for the next crack of thunder. The houses of healing resumed their rhythms. Healers moved between beds, their hands quick and practiced, checking wounds, administering tinctures, changing bandages. Patients stirred and ate, some sitting up for the first time in days, others still too weak to do more than sip water and sleep. The smell of fresh bread wafted from the kitchens, mingling with the ever-present scent of athelas and cedar. Dorothy had not slept. She had spent the night moving between the wards, checking on patients, conferring with the elven healers, and trying to keep her own nerves steady. Now, as the morning light streamed through the arched windows, she found herself standing beside Linwyn, grinding athelas leaves into a paste, while the elf prepared bandages with the kind of precision that came from centuries of practice. "You should rest," Linwyn said gently, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent lifetimes caring for the wounded. "You have been awake all night." "So have you," Dorothy pointed out, not looking up from her work. Her hands moved steadily, crushing the leaves with a smooth, circular motion, the mortar cool under her palm. Linwyn smiled faintly. "I am elven. We do not tire as quickly as mortals. Our bodies sustain us differently. But you—" She paused, studying Dorothy with concern. "You will burn yourself out if you do not rest, and we need you whole." "I'll rest when things are safe," Dorothy muttered, though there was no bitterness in her tone, just weariness. She finished grinding the athelas and scooped the paste into a small clay jar, sealing it with a wooden stopper. "How many more of these do we need?" "3 more should suffice," Linwyn said. "We are well stocked thanks to your efforts. You have been invaluable, Dorothy." The other healers speak of you with respect. That is not a common thing for one so newly arrived. Dorothy allowed herself a small, tired smile. Over the past few days, she had earned a quiet respect among the healers, not through grand gestures or displays of knowledge, but through steady, competent work. She was not elven, and she did not possess their centuries of accumulated wisdom. But she was skilled, she was calm under pressure, and she did not flinch at blood or chaos. She simply worked. And in a place like Rivendell, where beauty and grace often mask the hard realities of a world at war, that kind of practicality was rare, valuable. "You have a gift," Linwen continued, watching her hands move, "not just in skill but in leadership. The others trust you. They look to you when things become difficult." Dorothy glanced at her, surprised. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Linwen said softly, her silver-gray eyes steady. "You are doing more than that. You are holding the line. It is a heavy thing to carry the weight of others' lives, but you do it with grace, without complaint. That is rare, Dorothy, even among elves." Dorothy did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and returned to her work. But the words stayed with her, a quiet warmth against the cold knot of worry that had settled in her chest since the night's events. She moved to the next task, checking the supplies of willow bark and feverfew, restocking the shelves with clean cloth, making sure the water basins were fresh. Small tasks, necessary tasks, the kind of work that kept a healing house running, that kept people alive. As she worked, she became aware of voices, low, urgent, coming from the corridor outside. She paused, listening. "Don't trust it. That thing nearly killed us all, and now we're supposed to just, what? Welcome it? Let it stay? It's a dragon. Dragons don't change. They hoard. They destroy. That's what they do." But Gandalf said, "Gandalf's a wizard. He sees the world differently than we do. Maybe he's right. Or maybe he's putting us all at risk because he's too stubborn to admit a mistake." Dorothy's jaw tightened. She set down the cloth she'd been folding and moved quietly toward the doorway, staying just out of sight. She recognized the voices, two of the rangers who had come in with the last patrol, both of them injured but recovering. Good men by all accounts, but frightened. And fear, left unchecked, turned into suspicion. Suspicion into accusation. She stepped into the corridor. "Gentlemen," the two rangers turned, startled. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his jaw, straightened quickly. "Ma'am." "I couldn't help but overhear," Dorothy said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "And I understand your concerns, but spreading rumors and second-guessing the wizard isn't going to help anyone." The scarred ranger frowned. "With respect, ma'am, we're not spreading rumors. We're asking questions. That dragon is being evaluated," Dorothy interrupted, "by people far wiser and more experienced than either of us. Elrond, Gandalf, the Council, they're not fools, and they're not going to put this valley at risk out of sentiment." But nothing," Dorothy said, her tone sharpening slightly. "You've seen what I've seen. You've fought beside people who've lost everything. I get it. I do. But if you want to help, then focus on healing and getting back on your feet. Let the people in charge handle the big decisions. Trust the process, or at least trust Gandalf." The two rangers exchanged glances. The scarred one nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "Good. Now get some rest, both of you. You're no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." They nodded again and retreated down the corridor. Dorothy watched them go, then let out a slow breath. She turned to find Linwen standing in the doorway, a faint smile on her face. "Well said," the elf murmured. Dorothy shrugged. "Someone had to say it." "Yes," Linwen agreed. But not everyone would have, and not everyone would have been heard. She paused. You carry authority naturally, Dorothy. That is a gift. Use it wisely. Dorothy said nothing, but she felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. Another burden, but one she was willing to carry. Outside the valley, in the caves and ridges beyond Rivendell's borders, Nethrazim waited. The dragon had not entered the valley itself. Elrond had made it clear, politely but firmly, that until the hearing was concluded and judgment rendered, Nethrazim would remain outside the sanctuary's borders. It was not a rejection, but it was not an invitation either. It was caution, and Nethrazim understood caution. Understood it too well. So the dragon had settled in a high, hidden cave overlooking the valley, where the wind sang through the rocks and the view stretched for miles. From here, Nethrazim could see the lights of Rivendell glowing softly in the distance, tiny, warm, impossibly fragile-looking against the vastness of the mountains, and could hear faintly the sound of water and song drifting up on the night breeze. It was beautiful and lonely. Nethrazim lay coiled on the cold stone, wings folded tightly against scaled flanks, head resting on taloned forelimbs. The dragon's eyes, deep and ancient and tired, gazed out at the valley, unblinking, watching, always watching. Dorothy had visited once 2 days ago, climbing the steep path with Corvus perched on her shoulder. She had brought food, dried meat, bread still warm from the oven, a flask of water, and had sat beside the dragon for a while, saying little, just being there, present, not afraid. It had been comforting, a reminder that not everyone saw Nethrazim as a monster, that some people could look past the scales and the fire and the shadow of what had been done and see something else, something worth saving. But Dorothy had responsibilities now. She could not come every day. And so Nethrazim waited alone, listening to the distant beat of wings, Corvus, flying patrols, and the far-off voices of the valley below. Waiting, always waiting, and wondering if this fragile alliance would hold, or if fear would win in the end. The dragon's eyes closed, just for a moment, and a faint rumble, almost a sigh, escaped from deep within the massive chest. Let them judge, Nethrazim thought. I have been judged before, by harsher voices than these, and I am still here. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of pine and stone and distant rain, and Nethrazim waited. The Hall of Fire was a place of legend, a vast circular chamber carved from living stone, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting the history of the elves from the First Age to the present. The ceiling soared high above, supported by pillars shaped like ancient trees, their branches intertwining to form a canopy of carved leaves and stars. In the center of the hall, a fire burned, not in a hearth, but in a basin of white stone, its flames dancing with colors that shifted from gold to silver to pale blue. It was a place of truth, a place where lies withered and fell away like dead leaves, and today it would become a courtroom. Elrond stood at the head of the hall, his hands resting on a table of dark wood, polished smooth by centuries of use. He wore robes of deep gray trimmed with silver, and his face, ageless and wise, bore an expression of calm authority that commanded respect without demanding it. Behind him stood Glorfindel, the golden-haired elf lord whose mere presence seemed to fill the room with light, and Aristor, Elrond's chief counselor, whose sharp mind and sharper eyes missed nothing. The hall was filling slowly. Elves moved with quiet grace, taking their places on the curved benches that ringed the chamber in ascending tiers. A few rangers had come as well, Strider among them, standing near the back with his arms crossed, his gray eyes watchful and alert. Dorothy sat near the front, flanked by Linwen and another healer whose name she had not yet learned. She looked tired but composed, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. Corvus perched high above, on one of the carved branches that jutted from the pillars, his black form nearly invisible against the shadows of the vaulted ceiling. From here, he could see everything, every face, every gesture, every whispered word that passed between neighbors. Gandalf stood to Elrond's right, his staff planted firmly on the stone floor, his white robe stark against the muted colors of the hall. His face was grave, his eyes scanning the room as more people entered, noting who came and who stayed away, who sat where and who avoided whom. And then, at the far end of the hall, the great doors opened, and silence fell like a curtain. Two figures entered, flanked by rangers who walked with careful, measured steps. One was Marcus, the broad-shouldered farmer whose village had been burned to ash, whose grief had hardened into something sharper and more dangerous. His face was set, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides as if he were barely restraining himself from striking out at something, anything. Beside him walked Finn, the younger man who had lost his sister in the fires. Finn's expression was harder to read, anger, yes, but also uncertainty, as if he were not entirely sure why he was here or what he was supposed to feel. They took their places on the benches near the center, and the doors closed behind them with a soft, final thud that echoed through the hall. Elrond raised a hand, and the murmur of voices ceased. The hall fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire in its stone basin and the distant sound of water rushing somewhere far below. "We are gathered here," Elrond began, his voice clear and resonant, carrying easily to every corner of the chamber, to address a matter of great importance, a matter that touches not only on justice, but on trust, alliance, and the nature of mercy itself. He paused, letting the words settle like stones dropped into still water. Before us stands a question. What is to be done with Nethrazim, the dragon who now seeks refuge and alliance with us? And what is to be done with the artifacts recovered from the cult's stronghold, objects of power and danger that may yet pose a threat to us all? He gestured toward Gandalf with an open hand. Mithrandir has brought forth evidence and testimony. We will hear it, we will question it, and at the end, I will render judgment. But this will not be a trial of condemnation alone. It will be a trial of truth. And truth, as we know, is rarely simple or comfortable. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the stone. With respect, Lord Elrond, the truth is simple. That creature burned my village, killed my neighbors, killed children, took everything from us, everything. And now we're supposed to what? Forgive? Trust it? Call it an ally? His voice was loud, rough with emotion that had been bottled up for too long. A few of the elves shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gandalf did not move, but his gaze remained steady on Marcus, calm and unflinching. Elrond's expression did not change. Your pain is heard, Marcus of the Borderlands, and it will not be dismissed or diminished. But pain, however real and however justified, is not the same as truth. We must separate what was done from why it was done, and that requires patience. It requires listening. Patience? Marcus's voice cracked, raw and desperate. My home is ash. My friends are dead. Their children are dead. And you want patience? I want clarity, Elrond said firmly, his voice taking on an edge of steel. Sit, and let us proceed. For a moment, Marcus stood frozen, trembling with barely controlled rage, his fists shaking at his sides. Then slowly, as if it cost him something precious, he sat, Finn reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, grounding him. Elrond turned to Gandalf. Mithrandir, present your evidence. Gandalf stepped forward, his staff tapping softly against the stone. The sound echoed in the silence. I will begin with what we know, with facts that can be verified, not with speculation or fear. Nethrazim was bound, magically, spiritually, and physically, by the cult that has plagued these lands for months. The binding was not a simple spell cast in haste. It was a ritual of domination, woven over years, layer upon layer, thread upon thread, until the dragon's will was no longer its own. He gestured, and Aristor stepped forward, holding a leather-bound tome that looked ancient and dangerous. Gandalf opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with diagrams, symbols, and notes written in a cramped, angular script that seemed to squirm on the page. This, Gandalf said, his voice dropping lower, is one of the cult's ritual books, recovered from the stronghold. It details the process of binding a creature of great power, not merely controlling the body, but invading the mind, twisting the spirit, and forcing obedience through pain and terror and the slow erosion of the self. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the hall. Nethrazim did not choose to burn those villages. The dragon was made to do so, compelled, and every act of destruction was a torment, not just to the victims, but to the one forced to commit the acts. Finn spoke up, his voice quieter than Marcus's, but no less intense. But the dragon is free now. The cult is broken. Why didn't it stop? Why didn't it fight back sooner? Because the binding does not break cleanly, Gandalf said, his voice heavy with something that might have been sorrow. Even after the caster's death, the scars remain. The compulsions linger like phantom limbs, and breaking free requires not just strength but time and help. Without intervention, the binding would have continued to twist and control, even without a living master to direct it. He closed the book carefully and handed it back to Aristor. I have examined Nethrazim myself. I have seen the marks of the binding, both physical and spiritual, scars that run deeper than flesh, that reach into the very essence of what the dragon is. And I tell you now, with all the authority I possess, this dragon is a victim, as much as any of the people who suffered under the cult's hand. Victim! Marcus's voice was sharp, disbelieving, edged with something close to mockery. That thing has claws the size of swords and fire that can melt stone. How is it a victim? Because power does not equal freedom, Gandalf said quietly, and there was a weight to his words that seemed to press down on the room. And slavery is no less real when the chains are invisible. Would you call a man who is forced at knife point to kill his neighbor a murderer, or would you call him a victim and a tool? The hall was silent. Dorothy leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Gandalf, her expression thoughtful. Corvus, high above, tilted his head, his sharp eyes tracking every movement, every reaction. Elrond spoke again, his voice calm but penetrating. Are there others who wish to testify, to speak of what they have seen or experienced? A ranger stood, a tall man with gray streaking his dark hair and a scar running diagonally across his cheek, the kind of scar that spoke of survival rather than defeat. I will speak. Elrond nodded. Proceed. The ranger stepped forward into the open space before the fire, his posture straight, his voice steady but thoughtful. I was part of the scouting party that tracked the dragon before it reached the cult's stronghold. We followed its path through 3 villages, over 2 weeks. All of them were burned. But he hesitated, as if choosing his words with great care. There were inconsistencies, things that did not fit the pattern of a predator or a creature acting on instinct. In one village, the dragon circled 3 times before attacking, as if hesitating, as if wrestling with something. In another, it destroyed only the outer buildings, leaving the center untouched, almost as if it were avoiding something or someone. And in the third village, witnesses who survived said the dragon roared, not in rage, but in pain, as if it were fighting something we could not see. Marcus stiffened visibly. Finn's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced at Marcus as if seeking confirmation or denial. The ranger continued, his gaze steady. At the time, we did not understand. We thought it was strategy or cruelty or some kind of game. But now, knowing what we know about the binding, I believe the dragon was resisting, fighting the compulsion. And sometimes, just sometimes, it succeeded, if only for moments. He looked directly at Elrond. I do not claim to know the dragon's heart, my lord, but I know what I saw, and I believe there is more to this than simple malice or monstrousness. Elrond inclined his head gravely. Thank you. Your testimony is noted and will be weighed. The ranger sat. Gandalf nodded to him briefly, a silent acknowledgement of courage and honesty. Marcus stood again, his face flushed with emotion. So what? The dragon fought back sometimes? That doesn't undo what it did. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't rebuild homes or heal wounds or give back what was taken. No, Gandalf said quietly, and his voice was gentler now. It does not. Nothing can undo what was done. The past is written, and it cannot be erased. But the question before us is not whether the past can be changed. It is whether the future can be different, whether redemption is possible, whether mercy has a place in justice. He turned to face Marcus directly, and there was no anger in his gaze, only sadness and understanding. You have every right to your anger, Marcus, every right to your grief. But anger without clarity is a weapon that cuts its wielder as deeply as its target. If we condemn Nethrazim without understanding the full truth, we risk repeating the very cruelty we claim to oppose. Marcus opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, Dorothy spoke, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the hall. Wounds matter, that's not in question. Lives matter, loss matters, but so does truth, and so does who truly chose to cause the harm. She paused, her gaze steady on Marcus. If someone held a knife to your hand and forced you to strike another person, would you be the murderer, or would the one holding the knife bear that burden? The hall fell utterly silent. Marcus stared at her, his jaw working, his hands trembling. But he did not respond. Could not, perhaps. Dorothy continued, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its conviction. I'm not saying forgive and forget. I'm not saying pretend it didn't happen. I'm saying look at the whole picture. Because if we don't, if we let fear and pain decide for us, then we're just as blind as the people who put that dragon in chains in the first place. Finn spoke up, his voice uncertain, almost pleading. So, what are you asking us to do? Just trust it? Pretend everything's fine? I'm asking you to judge it by its actions going forward, Dorothy said simply, not by what it was forced to do in the past. Give it a chance to prove itself, and if it fails, if it betrays that trust, then judge it then, but don't condemn it for crimes it had no choice in committing. Gandalf stepped forward again, his voice taking on a note of formality. Elrond, if I may, I propose a structured path forward. Nethrazim has already expressed willingness to make amends, to serve, to prove through deeds what words alone cannot convey. Let that willingness be tested. Let the dragon take an oath, binding and public, and let its actions be watched and judged over time. Redemption is not granted in a moment. It is earned through sustained effort and genuine change. Elrond regarded him thoughtfully, his fingers steepled before him. And the artifacts, the Blade of Shadows, the armor, the other relics recovered from the cult's stronghold? Gandalf's expression grew graver, his eyes darkening. They must be studied, carefully and with all due caution. They are not mere weapons. They are tools of ancient power, and I fear they may serve purposes we do not yet understand. There are resonances, echoes of old magic that trouble me deeply. From the shadows above, Corvus let out a low, warning croak that seemed to ripple through the air. Gandalf glanced up briefly, catching the raven's eye, and a silent understanding passed between them. But that, Gandalf said, returning his attention to Elrond, is a matter for another discussion, one that requires privacy and deeper investigation. First, we must address the question of alliance and trust. Elrond nodded slowly. Very well, we will hear more testimony, and then, after due consideration, I will render my judgment. He looked out at the assembled faces, at the mixture of fear and hope and anger and uncertainty written there. But know this, whatever decision is made, it will be made with the weight of truth, not fear and not vengeance. That is the way of Rivendell, and it will remain so as long as I have authority here. The fire in the center of the hall flickered, its flames shifting from gold to silver to a pale, ethereal blue, and high above, Corvus watched, his sharp eyes noting every face, every gesture, every whispered word exchanged between neighbors. Someone in this hall did not want the truth to be heard, and Corvus intended to find out who. The testimony continued through the late morning and into the afternoon, each speaker adding another thread to the complex tapestry of grief, anger, confusion, and reluctant hope that hung over the Hall of Fire. Elrond allowed each person to speak without interruption, his face calm but intensely attentive, his eyes never leaving the speaker, giving each one the full weight of his ancient wisdom and patience. A woman came forward, an elf from one of the outlying settlements, her silver hair bound back in a simple braid, her robes the pale green of new leaves. Her voice was soft but steady as she described finding the remains of a burned farm at the edge of the valley's protection. The bodies of the family who had lived there laid out carefully in the ashes by someone, perhaps neighbors, perhaps rangers who had come too late. They were not warriors, she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white. They were weavers, farmers. They grew apples and kept bees. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The youngest was only 5 summers old. They had done nothing to provoke attack. They knew nothing of cults or dark magic or ancient feuds. And yet, she trailed off, her voice catching. The hall was utterly silent, the only sound the soft crackle of the flames in their basin. And yet, they were taken from us, Elrond finished gently, his voice carrying a weight of sorrow that seemed to span ages. Your grief is heard, Miriel, and it is honored. The woman, Miriel, bowed her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, and returned to her seat. Linwin reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly. Next came an older man, a ranger who had served on the borderlands for decades, his face weathered and lined, his hair more gray than black now. His testimony was more measured, more analytical, but no less heavy. He spoke of patrol patterns, of the dragon's movements tracked over weeks, of the timing and location of the attacks. It was methodical, he said, his voice rough from years of calling orders across windy ridges, but not strategic in any way that made tactical sense. The targets were scattered, seemingly random. A mill here, a barn there, a village square in one place, and an isolated farm in another. There was no pattern to the destruction that would benefit an attacker, No supply lines cut, no defensive positions compromised, no territory gained. He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. It was as if he searched for words, his hands gesturing vaguely. As if the dragon were being directed, Gandalf supplied quietly from his position beside Elrond. Commanded to strike targets chosen by another will, for purposes the dragon itself did not understand or control. The ranger nodded, relief crossing his face at having his thoughts clarified. Yes, exactly. That's what it felt like. Not strategy, not even madness, just compulsion. Marcus was on his feet again before the ranger had even finished speaking, before anyone could stop him. Directed or not, it still happened. My village is still gone. My friends are still dead. Their children are still dead. His voice echoed through the hall, raw and desperate, filled with a pain that had nowhere to go, no outlet, no relief. Finn grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back down, but Marcus shook him off with a violent gesture. You want us to just... what? Accept it? Say, oh well, the dragon was cursed, so it's all fine now? That's not justice. That's not even mercy. That's just cowardice. That's just looking away because the truth is too hard to face. Elrond's expression remained calm, but there was a weight to his gaze now, a quiet authority that seemed to fill the room like a presence. Marcus, I understand your pain. I have lived long enough to witness more grief than you can imagine, more loss than any one heart should have to bear. But if you interrupt again, you will be removed from this hearing, not as punishment, but as necessity. Do you understand? Marcus's face flushed dark red, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. For a long, tense moment, he stood there, trembling, on the edge of something, an outburst, a breakdown, violence perhaps. But then, slowly, with visible effort, he nodded stiffly and sat down heavily, as if his legs had given out. Finn kept a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, anchoring him. Elrond turned back to the assembly. Are there others who wish to speak, to offer testimony or perspective? A long silence followed. People shifted in their seats, exchanged glances, but no one rose. And then Gandalf spoke. I will now present the final piece of evidence, testimony from one who witnessed the binding firsthand, one who was there when it was done. A murmur rippled through the hall like wind through grass. Dorothy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Strider's hand moved to rest on the hilt of his sword, not threateningly, but instinctively. Gandalf gestured toward the doors at the far end of the hall, and they opened slowly, almost reluctantly. A figure entered, cloaked, hooded, moving with hesitant, unsteady steps as if each one cost something. It was not until the figure reached the center of the hall and stopped before the fire that she lowered the hood with trembling hands. Dorothy recognized her immediately. It was one of the cult survivors, a young woman, perhaps 20 summers old, her face gaunt and pale as parchment, her eyes haunted by things no one her age should have seen. Dorothy had treated her in the houses of healing, tending to infected wounds that spoke of restraints and rough handling, administering tinctures for fever and nightmares. The woman had barely spoken during her recovery, her mind still clouded and fractured by whatever horrors she had endured. But now she stood before the assembly, trembling but upright, her chin lifted with a fragile, desperate courage. Gandalf's voice was gentle, almost fatherly. Tell them what you told me, child, in your own words, in your own time. The woman swallowed hard, her throat working. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, and the hall strained to hear her. I was there when they bound the dragon. I didn't want to be. They made me, made all of us, watch. They said we needed to see, to understand, to learn what power looked like. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to physically hold herself together. The ritual took 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights without pause. They chained the dragon to a great stone in the center of the chamber, used iron and silver and other things. Things I don't have words for. Things that hurt to look at. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on, and the whole time the dragon screamed, not with fire, not with rage, with pain, like it was being torn apart from the inside, like its very soul was being ripped away piece by piece. Her voice broke completely, and she paused, breathing hard, tears streaming freely down her face now. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stared at her, his face pale, his earlier anger draining away into something more complicated. They told us it was necessary, she continued, her voice steadier now, as if speaking the words was releasing something poisonous that had been trapped inside her, that the dragon was a weapon, that we were making it serve a greater purpose, that this was how you built power, through control, through domination, through breaking something until it had no will left but yours. She looked up at Elrond, her eyes red and swollen but fierce with conviction. But I saw its eyes, and I knew it was wrong. I knew we were doing something terrible, something evil. I didn't stop them. I was too afraid, too weak, but I'm not afraid anymore. And I'm telling you now, that dragon is not a monster. It's a prisoner. It's a victim. And if you kill it, if you condemn it for what it was forced to do, then you're no better than the people who put it in chains, no better than the people who made me watch. The hall was utterly silent. The only sound was the woman's ragged breathing and the soft crackle of the flames. Gandalf stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Thank you, Aaron. You have shown great courage, more than you know." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and Linwyn rose from her seat and came forward to guide the young woman, Aaron, back to the benches, wrapping an arm around her shoulders protectively. Marcus stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling in his lap. Finn looked between Marcus and the place where Aaron had stood, his face a mask of confusion and dawning understanding. Elrond waited, giving space for the weight of the testimony to settle, for people to absorb what they had heard. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but clear. "We have now heard from those who suffered, from those who witnessed, from those who acted and those who were acted upon. The picture before us is complex, painful, but clearer than it was." He looked around the hall, his gaze touching each face. "We will adjourn now. I will consider all that has been said, all that has been presented. Tomorrow, at the same hour, we will reconvene, and I will give my judgment, not only on the matter of the dragon, but on the path forward for all of us." He struck the table once with his open hand, a soft but final sound that carried the weight of authority, and the hall began to empty slowly, people rising and filing out in quiet, subdued groups. Gandalf remained where he was, his staff planted firmly, his eyes distant and thoughtful. Dorothy approached him quietly, Corvus gliding down to land on her shoulder. "Do you think it's enough?" Dorothy asked quietly, her voice pitched so only Gandalf could hear. "I do not know," Gandalf admitted, and there was a weariness in his voice that he rarely showed. "But it is the truth, and that is all we can offer. The rest depends on whether people are willing to hear it, to accept it, to let it change their minds." High above, in the shadows of the vaulted ceiling, Corvus's eyes gleamed. "Someone watched," he said quietly. "Someone who didn't like what they heard, didn't like the truth coming out." Gandalf looked up sharply. Who? Don't know yet, Corvus said, but I will. Give me time. He spread his wings and launched himself into the air, gliding silently toward the high windows and out into the afternoon light. Gandalf watched him go, his expression troubled. Time, he murmured. Always time, and never enough of it. The second day of the hearing dawned cold and clear, with a sharp wind blowing down from the mountains that carried the scent of snow and stone. The sky was a pale, crystalline blue, unmarred by clouds, and the morning light fell across Rivendell in slanting golden rays that made the waterfalls gleam like silver threads. But inside the Hall of Fire, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and unspoken tension. The assembly gathered more quickly this time, as if everyone understood that today would bring resolution, one way or another. The same faces filled the benches, elves in their flowing robes, rangers in their weathered cloaks, healers and counselors and witnesses. Marcus and Finn took their places near the center again. Though Marcus's shoulders were slumped now, his earlier fury seemingly burned out, leaving only exhaustion and confusion in its wake. Dorothy sat in her usual spot, Linwyn beside her. Corvus was perched high above once more, his black eyes scanning the crowd with relentless attention, missing nothing. Elrond entered with Glorfindel and Eristor flanking him, and the hall fell silent immediately. The Elf Lord took his place at the head of the chamber, his expression grave but calm, and waited for everyone to settle before he spoke. Yesterday, we heard testimony, Elrond began, his voice carrying easily through the vaulted space. We heard pain, we heard truth, we heard complexity where once there seemed to be only simplicity. Today, we will hear from the one at the center of this matter, and then I will render judgment. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But before we proceed, I must make something clear. What happens here today is not merely about justice for past wrongs. It is about the future, about whether we can build alliances strong enough to withstand the darkness that gathers on our borders, about whether we can be wise enough to see beyond our immediate pain to the larger struggle ahead. He gestured toward the doors. Bring forth the witness. The doors opened, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice, deep, resonant, ancient, rolled through the hall like distant thunder. I will not enter your sanctuary uninvited, Lord Elrond, but I will speak if you will hear me. Elrond nodded once. Speak then, we will hear you. There was a shimmer in the air near the center of the hall, and suddenly Nethrazim's voice filled the space. Not magically amplified, but carried somehow through Elrond's power, projected so that every word was clear and unmistakable. I am Nethrazim, the voice began, and there was something in it, not pride but a kind of weary dignity. I am old, older than most of those gathered here. I have seen ages rise and fall. I have flown over lands that no longer exist, and sung songs that have been forgotten by all but the stones. A pause. The hall was utterly silent. And I have done terrible things, not because I chose them, not because I desired them, but because I was made to do them, bound, broken, forced. The voice grew rougher, edged with something that might have been pain or rage or both. For years, I do not know how many, for time becomes strange when your will is not your own. I fought, every day, every moment. I fought the chains in my mind, the commands burned into my spirit, the compulsions that drove me like a beast with a whip at its back. Sometimes I succeeded, for brief moments. Sometimes I could resist, could turn aside, could soften the blow. But mostly I failed. Another pause. Marcus had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the empty air where the voice seemed to originate. I burned villages, Nethrazim continued, and the words fell like stones into water. I killed. I destroyed. I did these things with my claws and my fire and my strength, and I remember every moment, every face, every scream. They are carved into my memory like scars, and they will never fade. Dorothy found herself holding her breath. Beside her, Linwin's hand had gone to her heart. I do not ask for forgiveness, the dragon said. I do not expect it. I do not deserve it. What was done cannot be undone. The dead cannot be returned. The homes cannot be rebuilt as they were. I know this. The voice softened slightly, taking on a different quality, something like humility or perhaps resignation. But I am free now. The chains are broken. The binding is gone. And I am left with a choice, the first true choice I have had in longer than I can remember. I can flee. I can hide. I can disappear into the wild places and spend what remains of my years alone, haunted by what I was made to do. A beat of silence. Or I can stay. I can serve. I can fight against the darkness that enslaved me and try, however imperfectly, to balance the scales. Not to erase what was done, but to ensure that it means something, that it was not all for nothing. Marcus spoke suddenly, his voice raw. Why should we believe you? Why should we trust that you won't just go back to what you were? You should not trust me, Nethrazim said bluntly. Not yet. Trust is earned, not given, and I have not earned it. But I am willing to try. I am willing to swear an oath, binding and witnessed, and to accept whatever conditions Lord Elrond deems necessary. I am willing to be watched, tested, and judged by my actions rather than my words. Gandalf stepped forward, his staff tapping softly on the stone. I have examined Nethrazim thoroughly. The binding is gone, truly gone, not merely suppressed or dormant. The dragon's will is its own again. But more than that, I have seen something rare in one so old and so powerful. Genuine remorse, genuine desire to make amends. He looked around the hall. I do not claim the dragon is innocent, but I do claim that the guilt is shared, and that the greater share belongs to those who forged the chains, not to the one who was forced to wear them. Elrond spoke again, his voice measured and thoughtful. Nethrazim, if I were to accept your offer of service, what would you swear? What oath would you take? The dragon's voice came again, strong and clear. I swear by stone and sky, by fire and ancient ways, that I will not raise claw or flame against the innocent, that I will serve the cause of light against the gathering darkness, that I will accept the counsel and authority of those wiser than myself, specifically of Gandalf the White and Lord Elrond of Rivendell, and that if I break this oath, my life is forfeit, and I will submit to whatever judgment is rendered. A murmur ran through the assembly. It was a strong oath, binding in ways that went deeper than mere words. Elrond considered for a long moment, his fingers steepled before him. And if I were to impose restrictions, boundaries on where you may go, what you may do, I would accept them, Nethrazim said without hesitation. I understand caution. I understand fear. I do not resent them. I have earned them. Finn spoke up suddenly, his voice uncertain but earnest. What about the families, the people who lost everything? What do you owe them? There was a long pause before Nethrazim answered, and when the dragon spoke again, the voice was quieter, heavier. I owe them everything, and I can give them nothing that will suffice. But I can offer this. Whatever strength I have, whatever power remains to me, I will use it to protect others from suffering the same fate. I will hunt those who would enslave and dominate. I will stand between the innocent and the darkness. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is all I have to give. Marcus stood slowly, his face pale, his hands trembling. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. I do not ask you to, Nethrazim said gently. Forgiveness is a gift, not a debt. You owe me nothing. But perhaps in time, you can judge me by what I do now, rather than by what I was forced to do then. Marcus stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, and then sat down heavily. He covered his face with his hands, and his shoulders shook. Finn put an arm around him, holding him steady. Elrond rose to his feet, and the hall fell into expectant silence. I have heard testimony from the wounded and the witnesses, he said, his voice ringing with authority. I have heard evidence of binding and compulsion. I have heard an oath offered freely and without reservation, and I have weighed all of this against the needs of the present moment and the dangers of the future. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. My judgment is this. Nethrazim will be accepted as an ally, under oath and under strict conditions. The dragon will not enter Rivendell proper without permission. The dragon will submit to regular counsel with Mithrandir, and will not act independently in matters of war or strategy. And the dragon's oath will be witnessed and bound by the power of this hall, so that any breaking of it will be known immediately. He looked toward the place where Nethrazim's voice had come from. Do you accept these terms? I do, the dragon said simply. Then speak your oath again, here and now, and let it be sealed. Nethrazim's voice rolled through the hall once more, strong and clear and solemn. I swear by stone and sky, by fire and ancient ways, that I will not raise claw or flame against the innocent, that I will serve the cause of light against the gathering darkness, that I will accept the counsel and authority of Gandalf the White and Lord Elrond of Rivendell, and that if I break this oath, my life is forfeit. Elrond raised his hand, and the fire in the center of the hall blazed suddenly brighter, its flames turning from gold to pure white. A shimmer ran through the air, like heat haze, and then settled. The oath is witnessed, Elrond said, and it is sealed. Let no one doubt its binding. He looked around the hall. Furthermore, I authorize Mithrandir to coordinate training and strategy between our new ally and the Rangers. We face a common enemy, one that does not hesitate to use domination and cruelty as weapons. We must be united if we are to stand against it. He turned to Marcus and Finn. I do not ask you to forgive. I do not demand that you forget. But I do ask that you give this alliance a chance. Judge it by what comes next, not by what came before. Marcus nodded slowly, his face still pale, but something in his expression had shifted. Not acceptance, perhaps, but the beginning of willingness to consider it. Elrond struck the table once more. This hearing is concluded. The judgment is rendered. We will meet again to discuss the artifacts and the broader threat. But for now, let this matter be settled. The assembly began to disperse slowly, people rising and moving toward the doors in quiet, thoughtful groups. Gandalf remained standing near the fire, his face grave but relieved. Dorothy approached him, Corvus riding on her shoulder. That was something, she said quietly. Yes, Gandalf agreed. It was, but it is only the beginning. The oath is sealed, but trust must still be built, and that will take time. Corvus let out a low croak. And someone in here didn't like it at all. Gandalf's eyes sharpened. You saw someone? Felt someone, Corvus corrected. Watching, waiting, angry. Can't pin it down yet, but I will. Gandalf nodded slowly. Then keep watching, my friend, because this is not over. High above, in the shadows, something shifted. Just a flicker of movement, too quick to catch, and then it was gone. The chamber deep within Rivendell's archives was cold and still, its stone walls lined with shelves holding scrolls and tomes that dated back to the First Age. The air smelled of old parchment and dust and something else, a faint metallic tang that seemed to cling to the back of the throat. In the center of the chamber, on a table of dark wood reinforced with silver inlay, lay the artifacts recovered from the cult's stronghold. The blade of shadows rested in its scabbard, dark leather worn smooth by age and use. Beside it lay pieces of armor, a breastplate, gauntlets, a helm, all crafted from some black metal that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. And scattered around them were smaller objects, rings, amulets, fragments of ritual tools whose purposes were unclear but whose malevolence was palpable. Gandalf stood before the table, his staff planted firmly, his eyes fixed on the blade. He had not touched it since they had brought it here 3 days ago, had not even come close, because he could feel it, a cold, watchful presence that seemed to radiate from the weapon like heat from a forge, but inverted, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with intent. Elrond stood beside him, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful and deeply troubled. "You have felt it as well." It was not a question. "Yes," Gandalf said quietly. "The blade is awake, not sentient perhaps, but aware, listening, waiting. For what? I do not know," Gandalf admitted, "but I fear we will find out sooner than we would like." Elrond moved closer to the table, though he did not touch anything. The armor bears similar markings, runes of binding and command, layered one atop another. Whoever crafted these items was a master of their art, and their art was domination. He paused, his eyes narrowing. "But there is something else, something I have seen only in the oldest records, from the wars of the First Age. These items are not merely tools of power, they are keys." Gandalf's head snapped around. "Keys? To what?" "I do not know," Elrond said, "but the runes suggest they are meant to unlock or activate something, some mechanism, some ward, some barrier that was sealed long ago." He gestured to one of the scrolls lying open on a nearby lectern. "I found a reference in the archives, fragmentary, incomplete, that speaks of blades that open doors without locks and armor that guards not the body but the way. It is cryptic, but the implication is clear. These artifacts have a secondary purpose beyond their obvious function." Gandalf's jaw tightened. "Then they are not just dangerous, they are bait, left to be found, left to be brought here." "Perhaps," Elrond said. "Or perhaps they are simply remnants of a larger plan, pieces of a puzzle we do not yet understand." He turned to face Gandalf fully. "But there is something more immediate. The blade has reacted twice since it was brought here. Once yesterday during the hearing, and once this morning, when Aristor was conducting inventory nearby." Gandalf's eyes sharpened. "Reacted how?" "A sudden chill," Elrond said. "A dimming of the light, as if something nearby bore a mark or resonance that the blade recognized." "A cult mark," Gandalf said grimly. "Which means someone in Rivendell carries the taint of the cult's magic, someone who has been touched by their rituals, even if they are not an active agent. Or," Elrond said quietly, "someone who is an active agent but has hidden it well." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that possibility settling over them like a shroud. "We must test this," Gandalf said finally, carefully. "We cannot afford to reveal what we know, not yet. If there is an infiltrator, any hint that we are aware of them will drive them deeper underground or force them to act prematurely." "Agreed," Elrond said. "But how do we test without exposing ourselves?" Gandalf thought for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on his staff. "The blade reacts to proximity, so we create situations where different people pass near it. Naturally, without suspicion. Inventory checks, research consultations. We watch for the reaction, and we watch for who is present when it occurs. Elrond nodded slowly. It will take time, and patience. We have little of either, Gandalf said, but it is the best option we have. He turned back to the table, his gaze lingering on the blade. There is one other thing that troubles me. The cult was not operating alone. They had resources, training, knowledge of old magic that should have been lost. Someone was guiding them, teaching them. Thurangol, Elrond said quietly, and the name seemed to hang in the air like a curse. You know the name? Gandalf asked sharply. I have heard it, Elrond said. Once, long ago, a sorcerer from the latter part of the First Age, minor by the standards of that time, but skilled in the arts of binding and domination. He disappeared during the fall of Beleriand, and it was assumed he had perished with so many others. Assumed, Gandalf said darkly, but not confirmed. No, Elrond admitted. Not confirmed. Gandalf's expression grew harder. Then we must assume he survived, and if he survived, he has been working in secret for thousands of years, building power, gathering followers, preparing for something. And these artifacts are part of that preparation, Elrond concluded. Yes, Gandalf said, which means we cannot simply lock them away and forget about them. We must understand them. We must learn what they are meant to unlock and how to prevent that from happening. Elrond moved to the lectern and closed the scroll carefully. I will assign my most trusted lore masters to the task, quietly, and I will limit access to this chamber to those whose loyalty is beyond question. Good, Gandalf said. He glanced toward the door. Where is Corvus? Running surveillance. A familiar voice croaked from the shadows near the ceiling. Both Gandalf and Elrond looked up to see the raven perched on one of the high shelves, nearly invisible against the dark wood. How long have you been there? Gandalf asked. Long enough, Corvus said. He hopped down to a lower shelf, his eyes gleaming. You're right, someone here is marked. I've been watching, tracking, following patterns. And? Gandalf prompted. And I have 3 suspects, Corvus said. All of them have been near the blade at times when it reacted. All of them have access to sensitive areas. And all of them have been acting odd, nervous, watching over their shoulders. Who? Elrond asked. Corvus tilted his head. One of the assistant archivists, a visiting scholar from the Grey Havens, and one of the newer rangers, arrived about 2 months ago with good references, but something feels off. Gandalf and Elrond exchanged glances. We need more than suspicion, Elrond said. We need proof. Then let me keep watching, Corvus said. I'm good at this, better than most. Give me 2 more days and I'll have your proof. Gandalf nodded slowly. 2 days. But be careful. If they suspect they are being watched, they won't, Corvus said confidently. I'm a bird. People don't pay attention to birds. He spread his wings and glided silently out through a high window, disappearing into the afternoon light. Gandalf watched him go, then turned back to Elrond. We are running out of time. The cult is broken, but their plan is still in motion, and these artifacts are the key to understanding what comes next. Elrond placed a hand on the table, his fingers hovering just above the blade without touching it. Then we will work quickly and carefully, and we will hope that we are not already too late. From the blade, a faint pulse of cold radiated outward, barely perceptible but unmistakable, watching, waiting, listening, and somewhere in the valley, someone else was listening too. Corvus loved his work. Not the fighting, not the dramatic confrontations. Those were necessary, but exhausting. No, what Corvus truly loved was this: the silent observation, the patient tracking, the slow assembly of a picture that others could not see because they were too busy looking at the wrong things. People, he had learned over his long years, were remarkably predictable. They had patterns, routines, habits they did not even know they had, and when those patterns were disrupted, when someone who usually walked confidently began to hurry, when someone who normally engaged in small talk suddenly avoided conversation, when someone's eyes darted to exits they had never noticed before. Well, that told a story all its own. Corvus was very good at reading stories. He spent the next day and a half doing what he did best, being invisible in plain sight. A raven in Rivendell was hardly unusual. There were birds everywhere, singing in the gardens, nesting in the eaves, drinking from the fountains. No one paid attention to one more black shape flitting between the terraces and bridges, which was exactly how Corvus liked it. His first suspect was Marinor, an assistant archivist who had been working in Rivendell for about 6 months. Young for an elf, barely 200 years old, with dark hair and a perpetually distracted expression, as if his mind were always half somewhere else. He worked in the lower archives, cataloging and organizing the endless stream of documents and scrolls that flowed through Rivendell's repositories. Corvus watched him for a full morning, perched on various ledges and railings, tracking his movements through the halls and reading rooms. Marinor's behavior was odd, not overtly suspicious, but off somehow. He moved too carefully, as if conscious of being watched. He paused frequently to glance over his shoulder, and twice Corvus saw him hesitate before entering a room, his hand on the doorframe, as if listening for something. But there was nothing concrete, nothing damning, just a general nervousness that could have been explained by any number of things: personal troubles, anxiety, overwork. Corvus filed it away and moved on. His second suspect was Sirion, a visiting scholar from the Grey Havens who had arrived a month ago to consult Rivendell's extensive collections on Second Age history. He was older, perhaps 1,000 years, with silver threading through his dark hair, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being respected. He spent most of his time in the reading rooms, surrounded by stacks of books and scrolls, making notes in a cramped, precise hand. Corvus observed him through a window, watching the way his eyes moved across the pages, the way his hand paused occasionally, as if he were copying something specific rather than simply reading for comprehension. And there was something about the books he chose. They were all related to ancient wards, seals, and binding magic. Legitimate research, perhaps, or something more. But again, nothing definitive. Just a pattern that felt pointed. Corvus made a mental note and continued his surveillance. The third suspect was the most interesting and the most troubling. His name was Tardan, and he was a ranger. He had arrived at Rivendell 2 months ago with strong recommendations from the northern patrols, claiming he needed rest and resupply after a long stint in the wild. He was competent, quiet, and unremarkable in all the ways that made someone easy to overlook. Medium height, brown hair, weathered face, the kind of ranger who blended into the background of any group. But Corvus had noticed something the others had not. Tardan never fully relaxed, even when sitting in the common halls, eating or talking with other rangers. There was a tension in his shoulders, a watchfulness in his eyes that went beyond normal caution. He was always positioned near exits, always aware of who was around him, always listening. And he asked questions, casual questions, the kind that seemed innocent in isolation, but formed a pattern when taken together. Questions about patrol schedules, about who had authority over what, about where certain artifacts or documents were kept, questions that a curious ranger might ask, or that a spy would ask while pretending to be a curious ranger. Corvus followed Tardan for most of an afternoon, hopping from roof to roof, perch to perch, staying well back but never losing sight of him. The ranger moved through Rivendell with the practiced ease of someone who had learned the layout quickly and thoroughly. Too thoroughly, perhaps. And then, just as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains, Tardan did something interesting. He glanced around, carefully, casually, and then slipped into a side corridor that led to one of the lesser-used storage areas near the archives, the kind of place that held overflow materials, old furniture, forgotten supplies, the kind of place no one paid attention to. Corvus glided silently to a high window and peered through. Tardan stood in the dim corridor, alone. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small pouch, leather, worn, tied with a cord. He opened it carefully and withdrew something that glinted faintly in the low light. A coin, iron, dark. Corvus's eyes narrowed. He had seen coins like that before, in the cult's stronghold, carried by the cultists as tokens of membership, as foci for certain rituals. Tardan held the coin for a moment, his thumb rubbing across its surface as if checking for something. Then he whispered, so quietly that even Corvus, with his sharp hearing, could barely make out the words. Still here, still waiting, soon. The coin flared, just for an instant, a dull red glow that pulsed once, and then faded. Tardan's face remained expressionless, but his hand trembled slightly as he tucked the coin back into the pouch and returned it to his tunic. Corvus's feathers bristled. That was not nervousness. That was not innocent. That was contact, communication, a signal sent or received through magic. Tardan glanced around once more, then turned and walked back out into the main corridor, his stride casual and unhurried, as if nothing had happened. Corvus launched himself from the window and flew swiftly toward the Hall of Fire, where he knew Gandalf would be meeting with Elrond. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. By the time Corvus found Gandalf, the sun had set and the lamps were being lit throughout Rivendell. The wizard was in a small study adjacent to the Hall of Fire, poring over maps with Strider and Elrond. All three looked up as Corvus swooped in through the open window and landed heavily on the table, scattering a few loose papers. "I found him," Corvus said without preamble. "The infiltrator, one of the rangers, Tardhen." Gandalf straightened immediately, his expression sharpening. "You are certain?" "Saw him with a cult token," Corvus said. "Iron coin. He was using it to communicate, whispered something, and it glowed, red, like it was answering." Strider's hand went to his sword hilt. "Tardan? Are you sure?" His credentials were solid, verified by the northern captains. "Then the northern captains were fooled, or one of them is compromised," Corvus said bluntly. "I know what I saw. He's marked, he's active, and he's still in the valley." Elrond's face had gone very still, very grave. "Where is he now?" "Don't know," Corvus admitted. "I came straight here, didn't want to lose time." Gandalf turned to Strider. "Find him, quietly. Do not arrest him yet. I want to know who he is working with and what his purpose is. But do not let him out of sight." Strider nodded sharply and strode toward the door. "I'll take 2 of my most trusted. We'll shadow him." He disappeared into the corridor, moving with silent purpose. Elrond looked at Gandalf. If he has been here for 2 months, he has had ample opportunity to gather intelligence, to map the valley, to identify weaknesses. "Yes," Gandalf said grimly, "which means the cult, or whoever is directing them, knows far more about Rivendell's defenses than we would like. But more importantly, it means they have a specific plan, and that plan involves these artifacts." He gestured to Corvus. "You said the coin glowed when he used it." That suggests it is not merely a token of membership, but a communication device, a way to send and receive signals across distance. Which means, Elrond said slowly, that he has been reporting regularly and receiving instructions, Gandalf added. He paced to the window, looking out at the darkening valley. The question is, what are those instructions? What is he waiting for? Corvus hopped across the table, his claws clicking. He said, "Soon." That's what he whispered. "Still here, still waiting, soon." Gandalf turned back, his eyes hard. "Then whatever they are planning, it is imminent. We may have days, perhaps only hours." Elrond moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small crystal vial filled with a faintly glowing liquid. "I will place additional wards around the artifact chamber. If anyone attempts to enter without authorization, I will know immediately." "Good," Gandalf said. He looked at Corvus. "And you, continue watching. I want to know everyone Tardin speaks to, everyone he looks at, every place he goes. If he has allies in the valley, we need to identify them before they can act." Corvus bobbed his head. "Consider it done." He spread his wings and launched himself back out the window, disappearing into the twilight. Gandalf stood by the window for a long moment, his hand resting on his staff, his expression distant and troubled. "What is it?" Elrond asked quietly. "I am thinking," Gandalf said, "about timing. The hearing concluded today. The dragon's oath was sealed, and now, suddenly the infiltrator activates his token and speaks of something happening soon. That is not coincidence." "You think the hearing was the trigger?" Elrond asked. "I think," Gandalf said slowly, "that we were meant to accept Nethrazim, that the entire conspiracy was designed not to turn us against the dragon, but to ensure the dragon was brought here, accepted, integrated into our plans. Because a dragon is a powerful piece on the board, and if you can turn that piece, or use it as a distraction, you can change the entire game." Elrond's eyes widened slightly. "You think they plan to target Nethrazim? To use the dragon somehow?" "I think they plan to use everything," Gandalf said. "The dragon, the artifacts, the fear and division they have sown, all of it is part of a larger design, and we have been reacting, not anticipating." He turned to face Elrond fully. "We need to move first, before they are ready. We need to force them into the open and break their plan before it can unfold." "How?" Elrond asked. Gandalf's expression hardened. "By setting a trap of our own." The attack came in the deep hours of the night, when even Rivendell's vigilant watchers were at their lowest ebb, when exhaustion weighed heaviest and attention wavered. It began with the lamps. One by one, starting at the eastern edge of the houses of healing and spreading inward, the lamps began to flicker and die. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious, but in a slow, creeping progression that mimicked the natural guttering of oil running low. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, half the main ward was in darkness, and then the smoke came. It rolled in through the ventilation shafts, thick, gray, acrid smoke that smelled of burning herbs and something fouler, something chemical and wrong. It filled the corridors and wards quickly, clinging low to the ground, making eyes water and throats close. Patients began to cough, then to panic. Healers rushed to open windows, to move the weakest to safety, to understand what was happening. But the smoke kept coming, thicker and faster, and with it came something else, a creeping sense of dread, of irrational fear, as if the smoke itself carried poison not just for the body, but for the mind. Dorothy was in the main ward when it started. She had been checking on a ranger with a healing leg wound, making sure the stitches were holding, when the first wisps of smoke curled around her feet. She straightened immediately, her instinct screaming alarm. "Everyone stay calm," she called out, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs of confusion. Linwin, get the windows open. Araviel, start moving patients to the upper terrace. Anyone who can walk, help those who cannot. She grabbed a cloth from a nearby table, dunked it in a water basin, and pressed it over her nose and mouth. The smoke was thickening rapidly, and she could feel its effects. A tightness in her chest, a growing sense of panic clawing at the edges of her mind. No, she told herself firmly. Not real. It's a spell. Resist it. She moved through the ward, helping patients to their feet, guiding them toward the doors, her voice steady and commanding even as her heart raced. Linwin and the other healers followed her lead, organizing the evacuation with practiced efficiency. But then someone screamed, "The dragon! The dragon brought a curse! This is its doing!" Dorothy spun toward the voice and saw one of the patients, a middle-aged man whose arm had been broken in a fall, pointing wildly toward the windows, his face twisted with fear. "It's cursed us, poisoned us. We have to get away from here before it kills us all." The panic spread like wildfire. Other patients took up the cry, their rational minds overwhelmed by the fear-inducing smoke. Some tried to push past the healers toward the doors. Others cowered in their beds, paralyzed by terror. "Stop!" Dorothy shouted, stepping into the center of the chaos. "There is no curse. This is smoke, just smoke, and we are getting everyone out safely. But you have to stay calm." But her words were drowned out by the rising hysteria. The smoke was doing its work, amplifying fear, turning confusion into terror. And then Gandalf was there. He strode through the smoke like a figure from legend, his staff blazing with white light that cut through the gray haze like a blade. The light pushed the smoke back, clearing a path, and his voice, deep and commanding, rang out with undeniable authority. "Enough!" The word seemed to echo through the entire building, reverberating off the stone walls. The panic stopped, not gradually, but instantly, as if Gandalf's will had physically arrested the rising tide of fear. "There is no curse," Gandalf said, his voice calmer now but no less firm. "This is an attack, a deliberate act of sabotage designed to sow fear and chaos, and it will not succeed. Now, everyone will move calmly and orderly to the upper terrace. The healers will guide you, and you will trust them. Do you understand?" Faces turned toward him, pale, frightened, but no longer panicking. Slowly, people nodded. "Good," Gandalf said. He turned to Dorothy. "Get them out, all of them. I will deal with the source of the smoke." Dorothy nodded and immediately resumed organizing the evacuation, her voice regaining its steady authority. "You heard him. Let's move. One line, orderly. Help your neighbor." The patients began to file out, still coughing and frightened but no longer hysterical. Linwin and the other healers worked alongside Dorothy, their movements smooth and practiced despite the chaos. Gandalf moved deeper into the smoke, his staff held high, the light blazing brighter. He could feel the magic woven into the smoke, subtle, insidious, designed not just to obscure, but to poison the mind with fear and suspicion. The work of someone trained, someone who understood the vulnerabilities of both body and spirit. He found the source quickly, a small brazier hidden in a ventilation shaft, filled with smoldering herbs and alchemical compounds that produced the thick, fear-laced smoke. Someone had placed it carefully, positioning it to spread the smoke as widely as possible. Gandalf spoke a word of power, and the brazier's fire extinguished instantly, the smoke ceasing. He pulled the brazier free and examined it closely. The herbs were common enough, though the combination was not. But mixed among them were fragments of something else, small shards of dark metal etched with symbols he recognized. Cult work. Again. He straightened, his jaw tight, and turned to find Strider approaching through the thinning smoke. "The patients?" Gandalf asked. "Safe," Strider said. "Dorothy got them all out. No serious injuries, just fear and smoke inhalation. They're being treated on the upper terrace." He paused, his expression grim. "But there's more. Someone planted charms, small, hidden, in 3 different locations around the Houses of Healing. Each one designed to amplify fear, to spread rumors, to turn people against the dragon." "Tardhen?" Gandalf asked. "We're tracking him now," Strider said. "But he's not alone. Corvus spotted him meeting with someone near the Eastern Bridge about an hour before the attack. They were too far away to identify, but it was deliberate, planned." Gandalf's expression hardened. "Then we end this. Tonight. We find Tardhen, we take him, and we learn who he is working with and what they are planning." Strider nodded. "I've already sent runners to lock down the bridges. No one leaves the valley without being questioned." "Good," Gandalf said. He glanced back at the brazier. "But be careful. Whoever is behind this is not acting rashly. Every move has been calculated. They wanted this chaos. They wanted the fear, which means they are preparing for something larger." From outside, a sharp, familiar croak echoed through the night. "Corvus." Gandalf and Strider exchanged glances and immediately moved toward the sound, stepping out onto the terrace where Dorothy and the healers were tending to the evacuated patients. Corvus swooped down and landed on Gandalf's shoulder, his feathers ruffled, his eyes bright with urgency. "Found him," the raven said quickly. "Tardhen, he's moving, fast, heading toward the southern bridges, the ones that lead out toward the hidden paths. He's running." "Then we chase," Gandalf said. He turned to Strider. "Gather your fastest rangers. We take him alive if possible, but we do not let him escape." Strider was already moving, calling out names, assembling a team with swift efficiency. Dorothy stepped forward, her face smudged with soot but her eyes clear and determined. "What can I do?" "Stay here," Gandalf said. "Keep the patients calm. If anyone tries to use this chaos to spread more fear or accusations, shut it down. We cannot afford to let suspicion take root." Dorothy nodded. "I'll handle it." Gandalf gripped her shoulder briefly, a gesture of trust and gratitude, and then turned and strode toward the southern edge of the valley, his staff blazing to life once more, lighting the path ahead. The hunt had begun. The southern bridges of Rivendell were a marvel of elven engineering. Slender arches of white stone that spanned dizzying heights above the rushing waters below, connecting terraces and pathways that clung to the steep valley walls. By day, they were beautiful, graceful structures that seemed to float in the air. By night, with only starlight and the occasional lamp to illuminate them, they became treacherous ribbons of stone suspended over darkness and thunder. Tardhen ran. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had planned his escape route carefully, who had walked these paths in his mind 100 times before ever needing to use them. His boots made soft, quick sounds on the stone as he crossed the first bridge, barely pausing to glance back over his shoulder. Behind him, he could hear pursuit, the measured footsteps of rangers who knew these paths as well as he did, perhaps better. And above, the harsh cry of a raven cutting through the night air. He cursed under his breath and ran faster. Corvus circled overhead, his sharp eyes tracking every movement, every turn. From his vantage point, he could see the entire chase unfolding, Tardhen fleeing southward, Strider and 3 rangers in pursuit about 50 paces behind, and Gandalf bringing up the rear, moving more slowly but with inexorable purpose, his staff casting a pale light that seemed to push back the darkness. "He's heading for the lower paths," Corvus called down. "The ones that lead to the eastern caves." Strider acknowledged with a sharp whistle and adjusted his course, signaling his companions to split. two continuing the direct pursuit, one breaking off to circle around and cut off the escape route. Tardan heard the whistle and understood its meaning. His jaw clenched, and he made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing straight, he veered left onto a narrower bridge that most people avoided even in daylight. It was older, less maintained, with gaps in the stone railing and a slight sway that suggested instability. But it was also a shortcut, one that would put him ahead of his pursuers if he could cross it quickly enough. He ran onto the bridge without hesitation, his arms outstretched for balance as the structure swayed beneath his weight. Below, the water roared, a pale, churning ribbon barely visible in the darkness. The sound was deafening, drowning out all other noise. Halfway across, Tardan reached into his tunic and pulled out the iron coin again. He didn't stop running, but he whispered urgently as he moved, his voice lost in the thunder of the falls. Compromised, pursued, need extraction, Eastern Passage. The coin flared briefly, a dull red pulse that seemed to answer him. And then, from somewhere ahead in the darkness, another pulse answered back, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Someone was waiting for him. Corvus saw the exchange of lights and dove, his wings folding as he plummeted toward the bridge like a black arrow. He came in fast and low, his claws extended, and struck at Tardan's hand just as the ranger was returning the coin to his tunic. The impact was sudden and precise. Corvus's talons closed around the coin, ripping it from Tardan's grip, and the raven pulled up sharply, flapping hard to gain altitude with the added weight. Tardan stumbled, thrown off balance, and his hand shot out instinctively to grab for the coin. His fingers closed on empty air, and the sudden shift in momentum sent him staggering sideways. His shoulder struck the damaged railing, and a section of stone gave way with a grinding crack. For one terrible moment, Tardan teetered on the edge, his arms windmilling, his eyes wide with sudden fear. And then he recovered, threw himself forward, and kept running. But his rhythm was broken now, his breathing ragged. Corvus climbed higher, the coin clutched tightly in his talons, and called out triumphantly, "Got it! Token secured!" Behind, Strider reached the bridge and paused for just a heartbeat, assessing its stability. Then he ran across, his movements sure and balanced, his rangers following close behind. Gandalf reached the bridge moments later and stopped, his staff raised. The structure swayed ominously under the weight of multiple people, and he could see cracks spreading through the stone near the center span. "Carefully," he called out. "The bridge is failing." But Strider and his rangers were already across, disappearing into the shadows on the far side. Gandalf waited, watching the bridge settle slightly, and then crossed himself, slowly, testing each step, his staff glowing brighter to illuminate the damaged sections. On the far side, the chase continued through a series of switchback paths that descended steeply along the valley wall. Tardan was slowing now, his earlier speed unsustainable on the treacherous footing. He glanced back and saw his pursuers gaining, saw the raven circling above like a harbinger of doom. He needed cover, concealment, something to break line of sight long enough to use the contingency plan. Ahead, he saw it. A cluster of old storage buildings built into the cliff face, half hidden by overhanging rock and trailing vines. He sprinted toward them, his lungs burning, and ducked inside the nearest doorway. The interior was dark and musty, filled with old crates and forgotten supplies. Tardan pressed himself against the wall beside the door, breathing hard, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Outside, he heard footsteps approaching, careful, measured. "He went in there," one of the rangers said quietly. "Only one door," another replied. "He's trapped. Unless there's a back way," Strider's voice cut in. "Edrin, circle around. Celeb, stay here. I'm going in." Tardan's grip tightened on his knife. He reached into his tunic with his other hand and pulled out a small pouch, one of the smoke herb mixtures the cult had provided for emergencies. He tore it open and scattered the contents on the floor near the door, then whispered a word under his breath. The herbs began to smolder immediately, producing thick, choking smoke that poured out through the doorway. Outside, Strider cursed and fell back, covering his mouth and nose. "Smoke! He's trying to cover his escape!" But Corvus, still circling above, saw movement through a gap in the roof, a shadow shifting, climbing. "He's going up, through the roof!" Tardan emerged onto the flat roof of the storage building, coughing, his eyes watering from his own smoke. But he didn't stop. He ran across the roof and leaped, a desperate, dangerous jump, to the next building, landing hard and rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself up and kept moving. Behind him, Strider appeared on the first roof, having climbed up through the same gap. He didn't hesitate. He ran and jumped, clearing the gap with practiced ease, and landed in a crouch just paces behind Tardhen. "Stop!" Strider commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. "There's nowhere left to run." Tardhen spun, his knife coming up defensively. His face was pale, slick with sweat, his eyes wild. "You don't understand. You can't stop what's coming. It's already in motion." "Then tell me what it is," Strider said, his hand resting on his sword hilt but not drawing yet. "Tell me and we can help you. You don't have to serve them anymore." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Tardhen's eyes. Doubt, fear, the faint ghost of the man he might have been before the cult had gotten its hooks into him. But then his jaw hardened. "I made my choice, and I'll see it through." He turned and ran again, toward the edge of the roof where a narrow ladder led down to a lower path. But he didn't make it. Gandalf appeared at the bottom of the ladder, his staff blazing with light, his presence filling the narrow space like an immovable wall. "Enough," the wizard said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You will come with us. You will answer our questions, and you will tell us what you have set in motion. This is not a request." Tardhen stopped at the edge of the roof, trapped between Gandalf below and Strider behind. His knife trembled in his hand. His eyes darted left and right, searching for any escape, any option. There was none. Slowly his shoulders sagged. The knife slipped from his fingers and clattered on the stone roof. He sank to his knees, his head bowing. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly it was almost lost in the sound of the distant falls. "I'm so sorry." Strider moved forward carefully and secured Tardhen's hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. "You'll have your chance to make amends, but first, you'll talk." Corvus descended from the sky and landed on a nearby post, the iron coin still clutched in his talons. He looked at Tardhen with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell with ravens. "They always say sorry," Corvus muttered. "After they get caught." Gandalf climbed the ladder and approached Tardhen, studying him with eyes that seemed to see far more than just the surface. "Who were you signaling? Who is waiting in the eastern passage?" Tardhen looked up, his face haggard. "I don't know his name. We never used names, just signals, instructions. He said there would be extraction if things went wrong, that I just had to reach the passage." "And what were your instructions?" Gandalf pressed. "What were you supposed to do after the attack on the Houses of Healing?" Tardhen swallowed hard. "I was supposed to plant evidence, to make it look like the dragon had done it, to turn people against it completely, to make sure the alliance failed." "Why?" Strider demanded. "What does the cult gain from turning us against Nethrazim?" "Division," Gandalf said quietly, answering before Tardhen could. "Distrust. A fractured alliance is a weak alliance, and a weak alliance cannot stand against coordinated attack. He looked at Tardan again. But there is more, is there not? The artifacts. You were watching them, waiting for something. Tardan's face went even paler. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Their keys, the blade especially, it's supposed to open something. Something old, something sealed. Where? Gandalf's voice was sharp now, urgent. Where is this seal? I don't know, Tardan said, and there was genuine desperation in his voice. They never told me. I was just supposed to watch, to report when it reacted, to confirm it was waking up. Gandalf and Strider exchanged dark glances. Take him to the holding cells, Gandalf said. Secure him and send word to Elrond. We need every ward around the artifact chamber strengthened immediately. As Strider began to lead Tardan away, the captured ranger spoke one more time, his voice hollow. You should know, I wasn't the only one. There's another inside, closer than you think. And then he fell silent, refusing to say more. The holding cells beneath Rivendell were rarely used, carved from living rock centuries ago, but maintained more out of tradition than necessity. Rivendell was a place of sanctuary and healing, not imprisonment. But when need arose, the cells served their purpose, secure, isolated, and warded against both physical escape and magical interference. Tardan sat on a stone bench in one of these cells, his hands still bound, his head bowed. A single lamp burned in a sconce outside the iron-banded door, casting long shadows across his haggard face. Across from him, seated on a chair that had been brought down for the purpose, Gandalf waited in silence. He had not spoken since Tardan had been secured here an hour ago. He simply sat, his staff resting across his knees, his eyes never leaving the prisoner. It was a technique Gandalf had learned long ago. Sometimes silence was more effective than any interrogation. Let the prisoner sit with their thoughts, their fears, their guilt. Let them imagine what might be coming. Let them break themselves. And Tardan was breaking. His shoulders shook slightly. His breathing was uneven. Twice, he had opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, Gandalf spoke, his voice quiet but clear. You said you were sorry, earlier, on the roof. Did you mean it? Tardan's head came up slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. Yes, he whispered. I meant it. Then prove it, Gandalf said simply. Tell me the truth, all of it, and perhaps, there is still a path forward for you that does not end in darkness. Tardan was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. I wasn't always this. I was a ranger, a real one. For 15 years, I served the northern borders. I was good at it. I believed in it. He paused, his voice catching. But then I was captured. During a patrol. We were ambushed, overwhelmed. The others died. I was taken. He closed his eyes as if the memory was physically painful. They kept me for weeks, maybe months. I lost track. They didn't torture me. Not physically, but they worked on my mind, talked to me, showed me things, made me doubt everything I thought I knew. About what? Gandalf asked. About the war, about whether we could win, about whether it was even worth fighting. Tardan's voice was hollow now, distant. They said the shadow was inevitable, that resistance was just prolonging suffering, that the only rational choice was to accept it, to serve it, to find a place in the new order that was coming. And you believed them, Gandalf said. It was not a question. Not at first, Tardan said, but they were patient, and I was alone. And eventually, yes, I believed them, or at least I convinced myself I did. because the alternative was to face the fact that I had been broken, and I couldn't do that. He opened his eyes and looked at Gandalf. They let me go, sent me back with a story about escaping, with references that checked out because they had people in the right places, and they gave me instructions, simple ones at first. Just observe, just report. Nothing that felt like real betrayal. But it was, Gandalf said quietly. Yes, Tardin whispered. It was. The door opened, and Elrond entered, followed by Strider. Both looked grim. Elrond took up a position near the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Strider stood beside Gandalf, his hand resting on his sword hilt. Continue, Gandalf said to Tardin. Tardin swallowed hard. My assignment was to get close to Rivendell, to observe the defenses, to report on movements, on morale, on the artifacts, once they were brought here. Why the artifacts? Elrond asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was cool, measured, but there was steel beneath it. What is their purpose? Tardin hesitated, and Gandalf leaned forward slightly. You said they are keys. Keys to what? I don't know exactly, Tardin said, and there was genuine frustration in his voice. They never told me everything, just pieces. But from what I gathered, there are seals, old seals from the First Age, wards that were placed on certain places, doors, gates, prisons. A chill ran through the room. Prisons, Gandalf repeated softly. For what? I don't know, Tardin said again. But I heard the name once. Thurangol, the sorcerer. He was sealed away, bound, like the dragon, but not killed, because they couldn't kill him. He was too powerful, too entwined with certain magics, so they sealed him instead. Elrond's expression darkened, and the Blade of Shadows is a key to breaking that seal. Yes, Tardin said, at least that's what I think. The blade resonates with the seal. It can attune to it, weaken it, and if enough power is channeled through it, through all the artifacts together, the seal can be broken. And Thurangol will be free, Gandalf said grimly, after thousands of years. Why the dragon? Strider asked suddenly. Why go to such lengths to ensure Nethrazim was accepted here? What does the dragon have to do with any of this? Tardin looked at him, and for the first time, something like fear crossed his face. Because the dragon is a power source, a living, massive reservoir of magical energy. If Thurangol is freed, he'll be weak at first, disoriented, vulnerable. He'll need power to restore himself. And a dragon, especially one that's already been bound once, one that has pathways carved into its spirit from the previous binding. A dragon is the perfect vessel. The room went utterly silent. Dorothy's voice came from the doorway, sharp and horrified. You were going to use Nethrazim, bind the dragon again, use it as a battery to restore a first-age sorcerer. She stood in the entrance, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists. She must have followed Elrond down, unwilling to wait above for news. Tardin nodded miserably. The whole plan, the attacks, the fear, the conspiracy, it was all designed to get the dragon here, get it accepted, get it trusted, so that when the time came, it would be close, accessible, and no one would see it coming until it was too late. Compassion as a lockpick, Gandalf said, his voice barely above a whisper. They used our own principles against us, knew that Elrond would seek truth, that I would advocate for mercy, that we would see the dragon as a victim and offer it sanctuary, and in doing so, we would bring it exactly where they wanted it. Elrond's jaw tightened. Where is the seal? Where is Thurangol imprisoned? I don't know, Tardin said. I swear, I don't know. I was never told, but it's close. Has to be, within a few days' travel. Otherwise, the plan wouldn't work. The artifacts need to be physically present at the seal site. And the other agent you mentioned, Strider said, his voice hard. The one inside Rivendell. Who are they? Tardhen shook his head. I don't know their identity. We were kept separate, compartmentalized. I've seen signals, met once at a distance, but I don't know who they are. But they're here, Gandalf pressed. Right now, in the valley. Yes, Tardhen said. And they have orders. If I failed, if the plan was compromised, they're supposed to act. Immediately. To steal the artifacts and bring them to the seal site, even if it means exposing themselves, even if it means dying in the attempt. Gandalf and Elrond exchanged sharp glances. The artifact chamber, Elrond said urgently. Now. They moved as one, Gandalf and Strider flanking Elrond, Dorothy following close behind. Tardhen called after them, his voice desperate. Wait! There's something else. The signal I sent when I used the coin. It wasn't just to my contact outside. It was a trigger, a general alert. Everyone connected to the network would have felt it. They know you're onto them. They know the plan is failing. Gandalf paused at the doorway and looked back. Which means they will act desperately, and desperate people make mistakes. Or they burn everything to the ground trying, Tardhen said quietly. Gandalf's expression was grim. Then we had better move quickly. They left Tardhen in the cell, still bound, still guarded, and they ran, through corridors and upstairs toward the deep archive chamber where the artifacts were kept, toward whatever confrontation was waiting. They reached the artifact chamber to find it intact, the wards glowing faintly on the door, undisturbed, the locks still sealed. Elrond pressed his hand against the door and closed his eyes, feeling for any tampering, any magical intrusion. Nothing, he said after a moment, though his voice carried more confusion than relief. The wards are untouched. No one has attempted entry. Then they haven't acted yet, Strider said, or they're waiting for a better opportunity. Gandalf moved past them and examined the door more closely, his staff's light revealing every detail of the carved runes and inlaid silver. Or they know something we do not. Perhaps the artifacts are not their immediate target. Then what is? Dorothy asked. Before anyone could answer, Corvus swept down through a high window, his wings spread wide, his voice urgent. Movement! Eastern caves! Someone's heading toward where the dragon is staying. Gandalf's eyes widened. Nethrazim! They're going after Nethrazim directly. How many? Strider demanded, already moving toward the door. Couldn't tell in the dark, Corvus said, wheeling around to follow. But at least one, moving fast, carrying something. They ran, through corridors, across moonlit terraces, down the winding paths that led to the valley's edge where Nethrazim had taken refuge. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and stone. Above, the stars wheeled silently, indifferent to the small dramas playing out below. As they approached the cave entrance, Gandalf raised his staff, letting its light blaze forth. The illumination revealed a figure standing at the mouth of the cave, tall, cloaked, holding what looked like a bundle wrapped in dark cloth. "Stop!" Gandalf commanded, his voice echoing off the rocks. The figure turned, and in the staff's light, they could see a face. Middle-aged, nondescript, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. One of Rivendell's many functionaries, someone who worked in supply management or records, someone no one would ever suspect. His name came to Gandalf suddenly. Brandir, a clerk, quiet, competent, unremarkable, and completely, utterly compromised. "You cannot stop this," Brandir said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The Master will be freed. The new age will begin. Your resistance is meaningless." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing one of the smaller artifacts, a circlet of dark metal etched with runes that seemed to writhe in the light. "This is enough. One piece, one dragon, one binding. That's all that's needed to begin. From within the cave came a low, rumbling growl. Nethrazim awakened, aware of danger. "You will not touch the dragon," Gandalf said, and there was something terrible in his voice now, something that spoke of power older and deeper than mortal understanding. "Put down the artifact, surrender, and you may yet live." Brandir laughed, a sound without humor, without life. "I was dead the moment I accepted their gifts. I know what I am, what I've become. This is not surrender. This is purpose. This is meaning." He raised the circlet and began to speak, words in a language that predated common speech, that hurt to hear, that seemed to pull at the fabric of reality itself. Gandalf didn't hesitate. He struck the ground with his staff, and light exploded outward, white, pure, searing. It struck Brandir like a physical blow, interrupting the incantation, sending him staggering backward. But the circlet was already glowing, pulsing with a sickly green light that reached toward the cave, toward the dragon within. Nethrazim roared, a sound of pain and defiance, and lunged forward, bursting from the cave in a rush of scales and fury. The dragon's eyes blazed with inner fire, but there was fear there too, recognition of what was happening. "No!" the dragon's voice thundered. "Not again! I will not be bound again." Flame erupted from Nethrazim's jaws, not directed at any person, but at the circlet itself, a desperate attempt to destroy the artifact before it could complete its work. But Brandir dove aside, rolling, keeping the circlet intact. The binding magic continued to build, threads of sickly light reaching from the artifact toward the dragon like grasping fingers. Strider drew his sword and charged, closing the distance in heartbeats. His blade came down hard, aimed at Brandir's hand, at the circlet itself. Metal rang against metal. The circlet flew from Brandir's grasp, spinning through the air, its light guttering but not dying. Corvus dove, fast as thought, his talons extended. He caught the circlet mid-flight, the metal burning his feet, but he held on, flapping hard, carrying it away from the cave, away from the dragon. "Throw it in the water," Gandalf shouted. "The falls, now!" Corvus didn't question. He angled toward the nearest rushing stream, the circlet clutched tight despite the searing pain, and released it at the perfect moment. The artifact tumbled through the air and splashed into the white water, vanishing into the torrent. The binding magic snapped like a broken string. The green light died, and Nethrazim collapsed at the cave entrance, breathing hard, trembling. Brandir stood frozen, staring at the place where the circlet had disappeared. Then, slowly, he turned to face Gandalf. His expression was no longer flat. It was anguished, desperate. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Without this, without the plan succeeding, he'll kill me, slowly. He can reach me anywhere, through the mark, through the binding I accepted. Then we will break that binding," Gandalf said, his voice gentler now. "As we broke the dragons, it can be done, but you must help us. Tell us where Thurangol is sealed. Tell us how to ensure he stays sealed." Brandir shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't. The binding won't let me. If I try to speak it, the words die in my throat. If I try to write it, my hand freezes." He thought of everything. Elrond stepped forward, his expression grave, but not without compassion. "Then we will find another way. But you will not die for this. Not if you choose differently now. Choose to help us. Choose to resist, even if you cannot speak directly." Brandir looked at him, something like hope flickering in his eyes. I can show you, on a map. My hand can move if I'm not trying to communicate directly. It's a loophole, small, but maybe enough." "Then come," Elrond said, "and we will end this, tonight." As rangers moved to escort Brandir back to the main hall, Gandalf approached Nethrazim. The dragon had recovered somewhat, though the great scaled flank still heaved with labored breathing. "I felt it," Nethrazim said quietly. "The binding starting again, the chains reaching for me, if you had not stopped it." "But we did," Gandalf said firmly, "and we will not let it happen. You are free, Nethrazim, and you will remain free. This I swear." The dragon's eyes met his, ancient, tired, but no longer hopeless. "Thank you, Mithrandir. I will not forget this." Dorothy, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward hesitantly. "Are you hurt?" "My pride more than anything," Nethrazim rumbled, something like rueful humor in the deep voice. "But I am grateful for all of you." "Save the gratitude," Corvus croaked, landing nearby and shaking his singed talons. "We still have work to do, and a sorcerer to keep buried." By dawn, they had their answer. Brandir, his hand guided by Elrond's subtle magic to bypass the binding's restrictions, had marked a location on an old map, a place in the mountains 3 days north, a valley that appeared on no modern charts, that had been forgotten by all but the oldest records. "There," Brandir had whispered, exhausted, as his finger came to rest on the spot. "That's where the seal is, where he waits." Gandalf studied the map, his expression dark. "Then that is where we must go, with the artifacts, not to break the seal, but to reinforce it, to ensure Thurangol remains bound for another age." Elrond nodded slowly. "I will provide what support I can. Rangers, supplies. But this task will fall primarily to you, Mithrandir. You and your companions." He looked at Dorothy, at Strider, at Corvus, perched nearby. "Are you willing?" Dorothy didn't hesitate. "Yes." Strider nodded. "Of course." Corvus ruffled his feathers. "Someone has to make sure the wizard doesn't get himself killed. Might as well be me." And from the cave entrance, Nethrazim's voice rumbled. "And I will go as well. This concerns me as much as any. Perhaps more. I will not hide while others face the danger meant for me." Gandalf looked at each of them in turn, and something like pride crossed his weathered face. "Then we have our company, and our purpose." He turned back to Elrond. "We leave at first light tomorrow. We will need provisions for a week, climbing gear, and anything your lore masters can tell us about the seal's construction." "You shall have it all," Elrond promised. He paused, then added quietly, "Be careful, old friend. What you are proposing, reinforcing a first-age seal, is work that has not been attempted in millennia. The magic involved is unpredictable." "I know," Gandalf said, "but the alternative is worse. Far worse." As the sun rose fully over Rivendell, casting golden light across the valley, the companions began their preparations. There was much to do, and little time to do it. But for the first time since this had all begun, they had a clear path forward, and they had each other. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Rangers checked weapons and packed supplies. Healers prepared medical kits and protective salves. Lore masters pulled ancient texts from the deepest archives, searching for any information about first-age seals and the magic used to create them. And through it all, Gandalf sat in the artifact chamber, alone, studying the Blade of Shadows. He had not touched it, still did not dare. But he sat before it, watching the way the light seemed to bend around it, feeling the cold pulse of its presence. "You are aware," he said quietly, speaking to the blade as if it could hear him. "You know what you are meant to do, and you know we will not let you do it." The blade gave no response, but the air around it seemed to grow colder. Gandalf leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "The question is, are you merely a tool, or are you something more? Did Thurangol bind a fragment of himself into you? a piece of his will, waiting to be reunited with the whole. Still nothing, but Gandalf's instincts, honed over centuries, told him he was close to something important. A sound at the door made him turn. Corvus hopped in, carrying a small object in his beak, a piece of parchment, folded and sealed with wax. "Found this," the raven said, dropping it on the table. "Hidden in Brandir's quarters. Thought you should see it." Gandalf picked up the parchment and broke the seal. Inside was a message, short, written in the same cramped script they had seen in the cult's ritual books. "The blade whispers. It calls to the seal. When brought close enough, it will sing, and the seal will answer. This cannot be prevented. Only the timing can be controlled. Use this knowledge wisely." Gandalf's blood ran cold. He looked at Corvus. "When was this written?" "Can't tell," Corvus said. "But the wax is old. Weeks, maybe months." "Then they knew," Gandalf said slowly. "They knew that bringing the blade to the seal, even with the intention of reinforcing it, would trigger a response, would begin a process." "A trap," Corvus said flatly. "You're walking into a trap." "Perhaps," Gandalf said. "Or perhaps it is simply the nature of the magic involved. First Age bindings were not simple locks. They were living things, in a sense, responsive, dynamic. The blade and the seal are connected, parts of the same working. Of course they will react to each other." He stood, taking the parchment with him. "But that does not mean we have no choices. It means we must be even more careful, more prepared." He left the chamber, Corvus flying alongside, and made his way to the Hall of Fire where the others had gathered. Elrond, Strider, Dorothy, and several of the senior rangers stood around a large table covered with maps and documents. They looked up as Gandalf entered. "We have a problem," Gandalf said without preamble. He placed the parchment on the table. "The blade will react to the seal. Bringing it close will trigger something, possibly weakening the seal rather than strengthening it." Strider's expression darkened. "Then we don't bring the blade. We leave it here, destroy it if we can." "We cannot destroy it," Elrond said quietly. "I have tried. The metal resists all conventional damage, and using magic powerful enough to unmake it might trigger the very response we are trying to avoid." "Then what do we do?" Dorothy asked. Gandalf was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he said slowly, "We bring the blade, but we do not bring it close. We use it as bait, from a distance, draw out any remaining cultists, force them to reveal themselves, and while they are focused on the blade, we work on the seal itself with other methods." "A distraction," Strider said, understanding dawning. "You want to split our forces, make them choose between protecting the blade and attacking the seal." "Exactly," Gandalf said. "And in that moment of choice we strike. We reinforce the seal before they can interfere, and we secure or destroy the blade before it can be used." Elrond considered this, his fingers steepled before him. "It is risky. If the timing is off, if they coordinate better than we anticipate, we could lose everything." "Yes," Gandalf agreed, "but every option is risky now. This gives us the best chance of success." Dorothy spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "And what about Nethrazim? The dragon was their target as much as the seal. If they can't have the blade, they might try to take the dragon instead." "Then Nethrazim stays close to me," Gandalf said. "Visible, protected. Another piece they must worry about, another element they cannot simply ignore." Nethrazim's voice rumbled from the doorway, where the dragon had been listening. "I am not a fragile thing to be protected, wizard. I can fight." "I know," Gandalf said, "but you are also valuable, and that makes you a target. So you will fight, but you will fight smart. Understood?" The dragon rumbled something that might have been agreement or annoyance. It was hard to tell. "Then we have our plan," Elrond said. He looked around the table. "We leave at dawn, 3 days hard travel to reach the valley, another day to prepare, and then we end this." The meeting dispersed slowly, each person moving to their final preparations. Dorothy lingered, approaching Gandalf as he studied the map once more. "Do you really think this will work?" she asked quietly. "I think," Gandalf said carefully, "that we have a chance. A real chance. But there are variables we cannot control. The seal may be weaker than we hope. Thuringol may have more resources than we know. And there may be traitors we have not yet identified." He looked at her. "But we have something they do not. Unity, trust, the willingness to sacrifice for each other. Those are not small things, Dorothy. In the long run, they may be the things that matter most." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Then, I guess we'll find out." As night fell over Rivendell, the companions made their final preparations. Weapons were sharpened, supplies were packed, wards were spoken over those who would travel, blessings given by those who would remain, and in the deep hours before dawn, in the artifact chamber, the blade of shadows pulsed once, a faint, cold throb of power that no one was present to witness. In the distant mountains, something answered. A pale light flickered briefly in a forgotten valley, then died. And somewhere in the darkness, a presence that had waited for thousands of years stirred slightly, sensing that the pieces were finally moving, that the long game was entering its final phase. The seal held, but it would not hold forever, and the race to ensure it lasted just a little longer had begun. Corvus stood on the highest tower of Rivendell, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten with the approaching dawn. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the company assembling, boots on stone, the clink of metal, low voices exchanging final instructions. "Here we go again," he muttered to himself. "More adventure, more danger, more chances to get singed or stabbed or blown up." He ruffled his feathers and turned to glide down to join them. "But at least," he added, "it's never boring." The sun broke over the mountains, and the company departed. Wizard and warriors, healer and dragon, raven and ranger, heading north into uncertainty. Behind them, Rivendell watched and waited. And ahead, in the forgotten valley, the seal pulsed once more, waiting